welcome. I'm so honored to have you. I'll take a million different questions, but just I ask everybody to mute and wait until the end of the presentation. I'm sure I'm going to probably take you on a bit of a journey. So, you know, if we need to catch up or if I need to go over any slides after the fact, please let me know. But here we go. This is a virtual seminar on the Mayan esoteric culture and its correlation to the Masonic G by Tennessee Masons of the Nashville Valley of Scottish Rite. And full disclosure, I am currently in the process of becoming a Scottish Rite Mason, but I am a third-degree Mason, and my lodge is number 711 John B. Garrett in Sitco Drive. If you Nashville Masons ever want to come over and hang out with us, we'd love to have you. So the first image I'm going to show you is actually a Mayan priest, and I want to correlate a few things right off the bat. If you notice, there is a rainbow headdress, there is a serpent, and then of course there is this staff or spear that this serpent is riding. That's going to be kind of paramount to the rest of our talk today. So the G is really ubiquitous throughout Mayan culture. They use it in all their symbolism, but it's always used as a backdrop. So if you look, here's a close-up of the detail of one of the feathered serpents at Chichen Itza, which is a complex in the Yucatan, Mexico. So while there's much about Freemasonry that can only be learned through the completion of its degrees, even the average person has come to recognize certain Masonic symbols in their day-to-day. Perhaps most notably, the square and compasses are distinctly identifiable as Masonic to even those outside the craft. This icon appears with a slight variation throughout the world, but it is commonly seen with the letter G nestled in its center. The square and compasses today can be found on everything from Masonic lodges to rings and bumper stickers, leading many to associate the letter G with Freemasonry. To Freemasons, the letter G is rife with symbolism and fertile history. It's significant for a myriad of reasons, and we're going to dive into deeper and learn about what the Masonic letter G means and how the letter came to be. The letter G, is depicted here, hangs behind the Mason's chair in a Masonic lodge. It's said to represent geometry, God, the generative nature of creation. Well, that's very interesting. So here we have a really fun and one of my favorite little pastimes. You want to check out a YouTube video about Pythagoras called Math Magic with Donald Duck. Disney put it on. And here he relates to phi. As you can see, all these different five-pointed stars, these segments of line, and then the five-pointed star, which the Pythagorean culture would keep on their hands as a way to recognize themselves. So some of the greatest mathematical minds of all ages, from Pythagoras and Euclid in ancient Greece through the medieval Italian mathematician Leonardo of Pisa, aka where we get Fibonacci from, and the Renaissance astronomer Johann Kepler, to present-day scientific figures such as Oxford physicist Roger Penrose, have spent endless hours over the simple ratio and its properties. But the fascination with the golden ratio is not confined just to mathematicians. Biologists, artists, musicians, historians, architects, psychologists, even mystics have pondered and debated the basis of its ubiquity and appeal. In fact, it is probably fair to say that the golden ratio has inspired thinkers of all disciplines like no other number in the history of mathematics. This is from Mario Livio, The Golden Ratio. Great book if you like to nerd out on geometry and the whole process and culture behind sacred geometry throughout the ages. So here we have another representation of the golden ratio. As you can see, a pentagon will turn into a five-pointed star, or that ratio is within it. That five-pointed star has golden rectangles within it that then create a pentagon. And this goes ad infinitum, right? So basically what we consider fractals today, it appears that ancient cultures around the world understood that concept. Here we have examples in nature of the golden ratio in phi. With sunflowers, the idea of 5 or phi as a golden ratio, and then the proportions of the human hand, and basically even the fetus itself of the human body in utero is always in a spiral. So the golden ratio is known as phi and correlates to the Fibonacci sequence, the mathematical constant of the seeming underlying pattern to all life in the cosmos, literally from the macrocosmic to the microcosmic. This is how electricity works. This is how trees are formed, our DNA. Everything is a spiral. It's very interesting on a molecular level. And here we have the sacred G of Masonic understanding. Notice the G in the middle and the 5-pointed star. And also notice the emblem, what's called the pentalpha. But also notice the emblem on the side here, the sun and moon and the G. We'll get back into that correlation later on in the presentation. These are just more examples of that same pattern, right, ad infinitum. I really want to impress upon you the idea behind this golden ratio, because we're going to be talking about it in depth as far as Mayan cosmology. Even the human body, and again, my background is in healing, even the human body, whoever is doing that, if they can mute, please. Sounds like a chainsaw.
Eric, you'll be able to mute them as the host. You can go ahead and mute everybody.
Well, I ran out of big juice.
Okay, I'm not sure how to do that, so I'm going to continue. It sounds like the sound finally went away. So even the human body, muscularly, is actually a spiral. So this is an example of one particular pattern of muscle tissue that goes all the way from the top to the very bottom of a human body, and as you can see, it's quite spiral in nature. Now, the reason this is so important is because the Mayans seem to have understood this. And specifically, not only the Maya, but ancient cultures around the world seem to understand this pretty well. So the first step I want to take is we're going to go through kind of a nesting doll approach to this. I want you to understand that this is literally the Mayan cosmology. This is how they understood their reality. So the first thing they understood is that the spiral was literally nature. And actually, Manly P. Hall, a very amazing scholar, said the same thing. As a matter of fact, the very first sentence in his amazing and very historic book, The Secret Teachings of All Ages, points to the spiral as the overlying pattern in nature. And I don't think that that is an accident. I think that that was basically a capstone process that he was explaining, that this was basically the overlay upon reality. Here we have Babbitt's atom, specifically relating to the Manly P. Hall correlation. And if you don't know Babbitt's atom, it's what Manly P. Hall references. There's a book called The Principles of Light and Color. It's worth $60. Pick it up. It's phenomenal. There's a reprint. It's quite great. So here we have different lines of force as it relates to the spiral nature of reality, specifically with the human energy field in the body. Again, this is from the 1800s by Dr. Babbitt. Okay. So the Mayans believed that the heart and the mind and the earth and all of creation was somehow these different lenses that they correlated to each other, and that essentially they all were working in tandem. Interestingly enough, there's this place called HeartMath that basically started studying this concept independently and found that your heart emits electromagnetic fields that change according to your emotions. So for my brothers, when we're all in harmony, this kind of correlates to that whole process. Heart rhythm pattern of an individual that's in frustration versus a heart pattern of an individual that's in a state of appreciation or gratitude. I'm just going to let you take that in for a second before I move to the next slide. So the human heart's magnetic field can be measured several feet away from the body. As a matter of fact, they have been able to measure the human heart energetic field, the electromagnetic field of not only the human heart of the person they're measuring, but anyone else in the room. The negative emotions can create nervous system chaos, but positive emotions do the opposite, as I showed you before. Positive emotions can increase the brain's ability to make good decisions. You can boost your immune system by focusing on positive thoughts. Positive emotions create physiological benefits in your body. And in fetal development, the heart forms and starts beating before the brain begins to develop. So it's very interesting because the Mayan knew this. They specifically talk about something called Hunabku, which is the center of all force, and it came from the heart specifically, not the brain. The other interesting thing is HeartMath has actually shown that there is a neuronal network that's actually of a finer nature that appears to be in the heart. So almost like a finer brain. So as I said, the magnetic field of the heart, our thoughts and emotions affect the heart's magnetic field at a distance. And in this particular experiment, it was about 20 feet. So, in 1953, Professor Schumann at the University of Munich was teaching his students about the physics of electricity. They discovered that the Earth's cavity produces very specific pulsations. The Mayans and the Native Americans in these ancient cultures talked about it as a heartbeat of the Earth. And Schumann resonance has now been proven, and it's at about 8 hertz, although there's evidence that it may be increasing. But this correlation actually correlates to your body. So the Schumann resonance actually entrains our physical body. Now, the Mayans understood specifically that the Earth and our sense of self, our physical bodies, were one organism, and that our bodies were an extension of that Earth. So they talk about a greater awareness in the Earth called the Kaban, which is basically the heartbeat of the Earth and the energy of the Earth. The Earth's heartbeat, as we talked about, has actually been shown to influence human behavior. Basically, human behavior, some scientists actually think that it could be creating thunderstorms and relate to those thunderstorms. And NASA's been doing experiments relating to that, which is pretty fascinating. Because ancient shamans, specifically some of them that I've studied, have said that the correlation between our human emotion and these storms that we're seeing is actually higher than you would think. So here we have the correlation between the human heart and brain and the Earth and the magnetic fields they both produce. This is a map of the geomagnetic reference field of the planet. So showing that the actual planet itself has an electromagnetic field. A lot of people don't correlate that, but there is actual scientific data to show that. And again, the Mayans understood this. However, activity on the sun significantly increases the rate of lightning strikes on the Earth. And the Mayans understood this, that there is this road or pathway between us, the planet itself, and then the actual sun beyond the Earth, and that there was this interesting correlation. So what's interesting is that it goes a little bit further, right? The Earth's magnetic field is influenced by what's called the solar winds of the sun. And these things create fluxes in the magnetic field. You have aurora borealises and things like that. But there's actual measurement to show that it affects the physical body of human beings on the planet, as well as birds, etc. So it seems that we have this correlating connection, unbeknownst to us, to most of us, relating to the solar field, that somehow it's an extension of our bodies. So if you're ever near the North or South Pole, you may be in for a very special treat, because frequently there are beautiful light shows in the sky, right? They're called the Aurora Borealis, or if you're in Australia, which I had the opportunity to hang out with the Aborigines and study with them, we got to see the Aurora Australis, which was also quite amazing. Tons of really cool blues and purples and pinks, just amazing. But basically, that's the sun hitting the Earth and having an effect on the electromagnetic field of the planet. However, the Mayans also understood that we were literally whirling in space and following a greater awareness. So when we think of the solar system and we think in 3D, right, we think in those planar geometries, but in reality, we're actually traveling on a ball in space, literally surrounded by a star that is also traveling. The Mayans actually had a concept for this, like I talked to you about earlier, and they call it Hunab Ku.
Hey, Karak,
Hunab Ku is known as the great. Yeah, go ahead.
So so you're the host right now. I know I have at least one person who's waiting to get into the Zoom call. And as the host, I've just realized that you're the only person who can admit them into the lobby. I don't know if there's any others who are currently. Do you know how to do that? If you click on participants at the bottom, there should be a spot where you can click admit to let somebody in. Do you see that?
I do. Robert McCoy is joining.
Yeah, go ahead and you go ahead and admit whoever's in there. There may be a couple.
It's only one. It looks like only one person.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
So this is where we get into. No, you're good. You're good. So if you're just joining, we talked about the G, the spiral, the correlation between the planet, our actual electromagnetic field of our heart, and how it correlates to the electromagnetic field of the planet, to the solar electromagnetic field, or what's known as our particular star. And the Mayans specifically, going back to this cosmology, understood that there was a greater field that we were a part of. And if you look at it, our sun is like a little speck, right? Specifically essentially a little speck. I'm omitting someone else now. Thank you for letting me know that, Warren. I'll continue to do that. A little speck surrounding and following and chasing the greater sun. And they call that greater sun Hunab-Ku. Now, interestingly enough, and I'll correlate this again in a minute, they called it the one giver of movement and measure. Basically, the grand architect that literally created reality, and they understood that it was a spiral. And we'll get into that whole process. A lot of this information came from my studies, as I already stated, with Jose Arguelles, who studied under a Mayan daykeeper and modern-day priest before he died by the name of Hunbut's Men. And Hunbut's Men wrote a book. Most of this information came from that book and from my talkings with Hunbut's. Essentially, the book is called The Secrets of Mayan Science Religion. So this isn't my theory. This is essentially what the ancient Maya still believe and still teach, but basically have been lost to a good chunk of people who were all about that doomsday approach in 2012. So essentially, their idea was all things were involved in all things, right? That there was this galactic envelope, and that essentially the great central sun, or Hunab-Ku, was this great giver of movement and measure, and essentially almost like an atom, it was pulsing this greater force, and our sun was also correlating. So there were cycles to the sun, and they understood these cycles. Now, it's important to understand that the Maya specifically dealt with million-year cycles. They were specific to our galaxy in 26,000-year cycles, but specifically relating to that greater level of millions of years that they were counting, right? What's called the longer count. So interestingly enough, the spiral or the five-pointed star or the dodecahedron in three-dimensional form has now been found to actually be possibly the shape of our actual universe. So the dodecahedron appears to be specifically the heat envelope that NASA is finding relating to our actual universe beyond our galaxy, which is pretty amazing. Hunab-Ku, it's seen as the source. It's seen in the middle of and centering all things. So it's in the center of all atoms. It's in the center of your heart. It's in the center of the solar system, of the galaxy. And it's these fractal patterns that the Maya were specifically obsessed with and seem to have a greater knowledge of. So including themselves, the world, the center of the galaxy, known as the Central Deity. It was the one giver of movement and measure. And notice, just like the yin-yang, it's made up of two different forces, right? Or even the mosaic pavement, that black and white force, but in spirals. And also, I'm an artist, among other things, and so I can appreciate the form and measurement. If you notice the symbol, it's also got an interesting correlation of almost balance of curve and line. And we'll talk about that. So the idea of, right, like here, you've got this really square, but then you've got this curve. So a really interesting kind of, symbol or glyph that seems to really encompass the ideas of both masculine and feminine, curve and line, square and circle. And that is by design, by the way, and I'll prove that to you in a minute. So this pattern is called the Zulkin. This was the main calendar. They had 17 to 20 calendars, depending on who you ask, that they were all tracking simultaneously, which is just mind-boggling. But this one was like the grand calendar in which they used to track all those other cycles. And the reason they say this is because they said that the Zulkin was 26,000 years, but also 2,600 years, but also 260 was basically the gestation cycle of a human being. So there are all these really interesting relations. And there are 20 tones or glyphs, and then 20 symbols, sun symbols, by the way. These are different kind of flavors of our particular sun that's being hit by the greater central sun. But the Zulkin was tracking cycles of 26,000 years related to the Pleiades. They were very, very adamant about the fact that somehow we were traveling basically with the Pleiades, that it was connected somehow. Also Sirius and Orion, which is very interesting. So, as a matter of fact, the Zulkin itself was a miniature map of the galaxy. And this calendar was used almost like a cipher key, as I said, for these other 17 calendars. They track the cycles of Venus, the Moon, the Sun, Mars, Mercury, Pleiades, Saturn, Jupiter, Orion, and so on. So this is a sombrero galaxy. This isn't ours, obviously, but it looks like ours from a distance. The cosmic shape of the womb. This is an example of a basic shape of the galaxy. You notice the ovoid or egg shape. The Mayan zero incorporates this ideology wholeheartedly. So the Mayans actually had zero independently of, supposedly, the Babylonian Empire. The Babylonians and the Persian Empire created zero, but it represented nothingness. The Mayan actually completely shifted that idea. Their idea of zero specifically was the womb, or complete wholeness. So actually, the zero, or this shape, also was seen as Hunab-Ku, or the galaxy. They correlated all of these things, like I said, were like Russian nesting dolls or fractals of each other, right? So they correlated that idea. There's no word or meaning in Mayan relating to the concept of nothingness. The Maya saw creation as completely 100% full. So here's a Hubble optical of that same sombrero galaxy, and you can see these different frequencies, and notice, again, that shape. Now, interestingly enough, on a side note, the Egyptian cosmology also says that this shape, which they call the Atum Ra, that particular shape also is the creative or creator shape. And they correlate it, as do the Maya, with not only the womb, the shape of the vulva, but also the mouth, that creation is a constant process of speaking. And interestingly, astrophysics now says that sound and light are warped, and that essentially that stars are created because sound literally goes out, creates a sonic boom, and then wraps around itself and starts to create form. And the Maya and these other cultures seem to have known this inherently. So here we have their basic counting system. And again, I pointed out in this slide, see that G? You're going to see it all throughout, because the idea is that this was the fabric that everything was built on. But again, if you notice that zero, as you can see, it's an egg shape. And then again at 20, right, they counted by 5, 10, and then they actually called their feet hands. So 15, 20, right, with their hands. But hand is one of the glyphs in the Zulkin. Interestingly enough, when you turn the Zulkin on its side, I want you to pay attention to the shape that you notice. So that same shape, and this is by design, by the way, that's what Humboldt's men would say, is that shape was inherent to the design of their calendar, because they understood that the shape of the galaxy was the shape, and the shape of the womb ad infinitum. So now we're going to talk about the procession. They seem to understand and know about it. The procession of the equinoxes happens at 23.5 degrees. There's a tilt, and that creates our equinoxes and our solstices. The Mayans knew all about all of it. And what's interesting is that, like I said, with this cycle, they understood that there were these greater cycles of 26,000 years, and then there were these smaller cycles, and then there was a wobble that was causing basically from equinoxes, etc. And they tracked it very interestingly, which you'll see in this slide. Plato also talked about a 26,000-year cycle, and he talked about different ages of mankind. The Maya seem to understand that and know it inherently. He talked about the Golden Age, the Silver Age, Bronze Age, Heroic Age, Iron Age. Also, in my process of studying in India, they talk about the Kali Yuga and the Yugas, or the ages, and the same kind of grander cycles of understanding. So NASA defines this period as a complete cycle of equinoxes around the ecliptic is about 25,800 years. And this was just discovered in the early 90s. So we're just now understanding something that Plato and the Maya and all these ancient civilizations seem to have known inherently. And essentially, the Maya actually talked about it as a 13 Baktun. So essentially, that whole idea of 2012 was the end of the grand cycle of Baktuns. And the thing about it is that the grand cycle of Baktuns begins again. So there was never this idea. I just want to really correlate this, because I don't know where the rumor came of like Maya 2012, end of the world. There was never this idea that the Maya thought that the world was going to end. The idea was, and if you look at technology and what's happening right now, it's pretty interesting. The idea is that there would be a grand singularity. The time itself would start to collapse. And then essentially from that 13th Baktun, that last time wave, when that process happened at 2012, when the cycle began again, the time itself would start to speed up, and that there would be an acceleration of consciousness. And if you look at 2012 to now, that's definitely been happening. As a matter of fact, what we can do, science and medicine and new thought in all these different realms of manufacturing has increased exponentially. And where normally our interconnectedness would be something we talked about as a great dream, well, that's becoming a reality. As a matter of fact, because of COVID, the ability for me to beam into your living room or your bedroom or wherever you're listening to me now globally has become ubiquitous. And the Mayans predicted that. They believe that basically we're accelerating into a grander cycle. So again, I just gave a correlation to these different ideas or different kind of nestings of how they would count time. So again, we talked about the Great Cycle, the Baktun, the Katun, the Tun. The Tun is 360 days. The Katun is 7,200 days. The Baktun is 144,000 days. And then the Grand Cycle is 1,872,000 days, or 5,130 years. And there were 4 Baktuns, or 26,000 years for the cycle. So you got to ask yourself, how in the world? I mean, this is so complex and precise. As a matter of fact, when the Catholic Church descended on the Mayan civilization, which was still somewhat flourishing, but was actually in decline, and that's when they started with the human sacrifice and all that kind of stuff, essentially their civilization was in so much decline that they had forgotten half of what they had known before the civilization was out of decline. And again, I correlate that. There was similar things happening with both Babylon and Egypt. There seemed to be a similar kind of zeitgeist happening. But on top of that, they seemed to know about leap year and correlated that. And that actually freaked out the Catholic priests. And so at the time, they said the only way you would have known about this is if you were basically in league with the devil. And so they started, trying to convert as many people as possible because, they just couldn't see how heathens could be scientific. So Kukulkan is known as a feathered serpent. It's also Quetzalcoatl. It's basically a Mayan snake deity that also serves to designate historical person or people that are in that kind of initiation or understanding. So the depiction of the feathered serpent deity at present in other cultures of Mesoamerica, Kukulkan is closely related to the god Kugmats and the Kichi Maya and the Quetzalcoatl of the Aztecs, as we already talked about. And little is known of the mythology of this pre-Columbian deity, other than he seems to have visited in the past. He seems to have brought architecture, their understanding of music, which was very advanced, their understanding of astronomy, healing, all of that seemed to come from this feathered serpent deity. Although heavily Mexichanized, Kukulkan has his origins among the Maya of the Classic period, where he was known as Waxalhan Ubukan, the war serpent. And he's been identified as a post-classic version of the vision serpent of classic Maya. Now, interestingly enough, they correlate Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl with the planet Venus. Here's a glyph of Venus. If you notice, there are 4 kind of nodes and then 4 circles around that planet, for a total of 8. Now, what's interesting, and I'll show you in a second, is that the Maya seem to know something that we're just, again, learning now that we've got the advance of technology, where we can look at something in an 8-year cycle and actually graph it in real time, right, like through time-lapse photography and that kind of thing. So we'll get to Venus. This is a great platform of Venus, also in Chichen Itza. And basically, the side panels have mythical creatures. One is part eagle, which correlated to the winter solstice. One is the serpent, which correlated to the summer solstice. One is the jaguar, which correlated to one of the equinoxes. And one of them is the human form, which correlated to the other. Here's another example of the glyph of Venus on the Chichen Itza Pyramid. And this is where we see a lot of Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl imagery of the feathered serpent. And this is this is actually the platform of Venus. And they tracked Venus on this platform, which is pretty profound. So interestingly enough, Venus makes a perfect 5-pointed star in the sky every 8 years. So it actually traveling around the Earth, and the Maya understood this. They understood the 8-year cycle, and they understood that it makes a perfect 5-pointed part of the sky. It's actually called the Dance of Venus or the Rose of Venus. We have now been able to see that basically through time-lapse photography over an 8-year cycle. It's pretty profound. This is actually, this next image is actually the Chesinita Pyramid at equinox. Notice there are 9-stepped platforms, but there is a 7-triangled serpent that shows up on the equinox every year, like clockwork, for about 3 hours, showing the play of light and dark, showing the cycle of balance in nature. Now, on May 20th in the current era, the center of the sky, so literally the center of that pyramid, the sun and the Pleiades are conjunct each other, and they called Pleiades the rattle. So interestingly enough, each staircase of this pyramid is 91 steps, and the upper platform around the temple totals 365. So it literally was a physical calendar for the year in stone. Yeah, pretty awesome. Let me admit these two people. I apologize. Hold on 1 second. Guys got me juggling. All right. So the ancient Maya based their many calendars on the movement of planets as well as the constellations, with Venus and Pleiades playing an important role. From their observation of the cosmos, they determine the character or personality of each cycle, which could be anything from a day to thousands of years and even millions of years. So these cycles continued to correlate. Now, if you noticed, and that's a modern Mayan priest, there's a shell over the third eye, or what's known as the third eye, or the pineal gland. This is their main leader that was found in Chichen Itza, Pacovotan. And essentially Pacovotan is, if you notice, there is what's known as a zalba, which is a flower in the Mayan tradition, and we'll go over that in a minute, literally over the third eye. Now, this is not an accident. It's actually talked about in their cosmology. So interestingly enough, there's a Christian correlation. The light of the body is the eye. If therefore thine eye be single, the whole body shall be full of light. A lot of people have correlated that particular passage in King James to the eye of the idea of the third eye. It's important to note that the pineal gland actually has rods and cones, just like the normal eye. It's literally a dormant mind's eye in the body. This has been proven anatomically. And if you know Alex Gray, this is called Human Geometry by Alex Gray. This is a great correlation to what we're going to be talking about next. Now, draw a circle with a square. So the idea of a circle and a square three-dimensionally is a cube and a sphere. We'll come back to that. So there are some people that believe that the working tools of creation are just simply a circle and a sphere. And the Mayan would definitely agree with that idea. As a matter of fact, when Pacovotan was found, this is how he was found. In his left hand was a sphere. In his right hand was a cube. They don't know why. Interestingly enough, he's wearing an apron. And that seemed to correlate. And he was wearing jade, as well as over the top there was a T cross in over his what would be the brow or his third eye. So they believe that God is within everything, right? God is one force of which everything in the universe is an inseparable, not separable part. That quote is from Walter Russell. If you don't know him, he's an amazing artist from the early 1900s. Worth checking out. Very obscure, but incredible. But the Mayan would agree with him. He would be right at home. As a matter of fact, if you're a fan of Nikola Tesla, Tesla told Walter Russell to lock up his research for 1,000 years, and then people would be ready for it because it was so advanced and way ahead of its time. The Maya would 100% agree, and he would probably, honestly, be in kindergarten with the Maya compared to their knowledge base. So here is the famous Pacovotan tomb the sarcophagus, which people have talked about as being a rocket ship, right? That's a huge thing. The ancient aliens with Zukalos and the crazy hair. If you watch any History Channel, they talk about the rocket ship idea. The Mayans would have a different approach. They would actually talk about this as being the world tree, that this was a tree that was literally coming out of his body, and it was a solar tree. We'll come back to that, but the idea was that there was a silver cord or cord that was wrapped around the tree, and that the tree and the cord were part of this greater lens, and that lens extended to the sun. Here is an actual picture of Pakavotan, and a reconstruction, obviously, of his body, but specifically of his death mask. You can see that his earrings are circles and squares, and you can see, as I said, the cube is a little hard to see with the shadow, but I think it's quite incredible. You can see the cube, and this is all jade, by the way. And if anyone is familiar with the Chinese and their interest in jade, it's very interesting to see the Chinese and Mayan connection with the jade. They were huge believers in jade, and again, many backgrounds to my story, right? Many lifetimes, one of them being in the healing industry. Jade actually creates a negative ion interaction with the body. So there is some interesting things related to jade and healing, and the Mayans seem to have understood that as well. So this is the Mayan sacred tree. We're going to take each of these different parts of the sarcophagus, going to break them down. So this is called the world tree, the foliated cross of Plinke. The Mayan world tree grows out of the underworld to center creation, right? And the creation happened, the Hunab Ku was in the heart, and then there was another Hunab Ku that happened in the generative center of the body, what you would, most people would understand the Mayan idea, or the modern idea would be a Dantian. Interestingly enough, where we're all born from. So these cultures seem to understand that, right? And the Mayan specifically understood that. So atop the world tree of Paco's sarcophagus is an odd-looking bird. It wears a jeweled pectoral and bearing sacred mirror markings on his forehead and tail. The cut shell of his forehead and other deity markings identify as Itzam Yi. It's the avian form, or the bird form, of one of the gods who helped set the last of the three hearthstones at the center of the cosmos on the day of creation. Interestingly enough, that particular place is in the east. His name is derived from the word Itz. It's a Mayan concept that is difficult to translate into English. It's kind of supernatural power. It literally permeates life-giving fluids of all things, both animate and inanimate. It would correlate basically to the idea of chi or ki or prana or orgone or different actually, there are 97 different different words for it, or 97 languages that all have the same kind of concept for the word for it. In the Kabbalah, it would be the astral light. So there's a lot of correlation to this and this particular idea. It's found in blood, tears, milk, semen, rain, tree, sap, honey, and even candle wax. And as a beekeeper myself, candle wax is magical. So there's that whole aspect of it as well. Linda Schill refers to it as cosmic ooze, the magical stuff of the universe. It was believed to wield the means to channel the supernatural power so as to give order to the cosmos and set the stage for creation. His presence atop the world tree depicted in the sarcophagus indicates that the tree is alive with sacred power. Now remember, this isn't a normal tree. The Maya had the concept that the tree was this outgrowth of our spirit, and that the tree existed within us. So that bird is in some ways what the Egyptian would refer to, or would correlate to what the Egyptian would refer to as the Ka. Basically the idea that the soul has wings, right? The Maya had that same concept. So, in Mayan art, such as signs distinguish objects and deities as sacred and precious and incorruptible. At the end of each of the branches of the tree are jeweled serpent heads with squared snouts that curl back on themselves. They represent sacred flowers, like the flower of the ceiba tree, the thing that was growing out of Pakavotan's forehead, whose stamens and pollen cores double back in a similar manner. In Mesoamerican theology, the world tree grew at the locus of creation, all things flowing out from that spot in the four directions. The tree thus forms what Elad refers to as the symbolism of the center. The center is therefore, first and foremost, the point of absolute beginning, where the latent energies of the sacred world first came into being. The source of all creation was often seen as a vertical axis, or axis mundi, which stands at the center of the cosmos and passes through each of the three major layers of existence: underworld, terrestrial plane, and sky. And remember, I gave you that whole, and if you're just joining or joined just a little bit ago, I gave a whole talk on the idea of this Russian nesting doll approach to cosmogony, that the Mayan believed that these things all correlated and somehow resonated with each other, and that the process of getting into alignment created a greater power for the Itza, or that sacred force. Also, the idea of the soul, they had that idea, the Itza Nakal, which was the white flowering thing. That was their idea of what the soul was. So this is actually a mature ceiba tree, and its flowers, notice the five-pointed star of the tree, the geometry. As a matter of fact, all fruit is five-pointed flowering, which is very interesting. But this tree, if I saw it in nature, I would be flipping out, because the thing is like huge, thorny. I mean, it looks like a freaking castle when you see it live. It's literally otherworldly. But they believe that the soul had this flowering potential. So again, reconstruction of the body of Paco Batan. Notice the sphere and cube. And now we're going to go to actually Paco wears a net skirt in his sarcophagus, bound up hair and jade ornaments, identifying him as the embodiment of the great creator god Hunnal Yi, who is also descended from the underworld, eventually to rise again to new life as a creator. A fiery torch is set in Paco's brow, a symbol of deification that appears only on images of gods or deceased kings. In death, the king has become the principal god of life and organizer of the cosmos. Across his chest is a turtle pectoral, symbolic of the great earth turtle through whose cracked carapace emerged at the dawn of creation. Within the sarcophagus, the body of Pakal repeats his imagery in physical terms. There are over 700 pieces of fine jade, and 7, 3, and 5 were sacred to the Maya, by the way. It was a huge thing for them. Adorn the body, including a heavy mosaic mask that completely covered his face. A jade Sakhun god was found next to the head, originally worn affixed to the royal headband. 2 large jade pieces, one carved into a sphere and held in the king's left hand, and the other a cube in the right, remain an intriguing mystery. This interest in geometric shapes is unprecedented in known Maya royal burials, and its significance is still unexplained, although the sphere may represent the dome of the heavens and the cube the quadrilateral earth. This is Hunbut's Men. He was one of the people that I considered to be a great mentor. I got to know him for a few years before he passed. An incredible scribe of the Mayan culture present day. And if you don't have the ability to, I would recommend his books highly. The rest of this imagery for most of his talk is going to be related. Literally, I reached out to his wife, who's still alive, and asked her for permission. The Maya believe that our culture takes. Our culture is constantly taking. So I wanted to honor this talk and this knowledge and give everything I could by saying, not only do I want to represent, you know, the Mayan culture, the dig keepers, but also Hunbut's Men, you know, may I. And that was huge. She actually cried, "Oh my God, thank you so much." You know, so that touched my heart very deeply. They're heart-centric. So the reason I said I'm from Portland, Oregon originally is because an architect friend of mine, completely unrelated, went down to Mayan land and learned how they relate cosmogony, this thing I'm kind of explaining to you, their worldview, in their architecture, in their urban planning. And then he came back and he started creating complete shifts in the way in which we create landscape in cities. If you're wanting to talk about that, I didn't present slides on that, but I think it's fascinating. I'd love to have a Q&A with that. So if you want to just put a pin on it, remind me, and I'll tell you about what's called the Village Building Convergence, which is literally him taking Mayan knowledge and inputting it into one city, and now it's literally global, which is incredible. But Hunbut's Men is who I'm going to be taking the rest of his knowledge from. I think it's important for you to understand this is not my belief system. This is just a correlation to what was conveyed to me and what he wrote down. This is from the Mayan codices. There are 3 that are major and known. Notice all the G's. They literally call it G, and it is one of the main symbols in their cosmogony. We have the Dresden Codex. We see a Lord standing in water, looking upward and receiving the falling water. This also happens in relation to the sacred G of the Milky Way. This is, again, Humboldt's words, not mine. Drawing 2 is the Dresden Codex. We see a Lord sitting on a T-shaped structure, in the middle in a spiral symbol of time. In his hands, we see the O of consciousness, or the circle with a circle within it, the circumpunct in dynamic action. And those 3 symbols, the T, the G, and the circumpunct, were huge in Mayan culture. However, you wouldn't know because literally it's all in the background. They didn't make it foreground because they believed it was the fabric that everything sat on. So a dog carries 2 flaming sources, a drawing 3, and the right is a man with closed eyes. Here we see a G in full function. Man seated in front of an altar in which we see the sign of a sacred G or Milky Way in front of them. So there are many examples. He gave 10. But as you can see, all of these examples, the letter G, or the idea of the spiral, but they called it G, literally permeated their culture. So the ancient Maya were always searching for a more accurate description of observed reality. This is, again, directly from Humboldt's men. The symbology of the Milky Way, including another graphic form besides the spiral representation. From persistent observation of the cosmos, the Maya knew precisely and scientifically the position of the movements of planets and other astral bodies. Astronomy and astrology were the foundations of their philosophy. For this reason, they also understood that our galaxy had another graphic configuration, which they adopted and began to use as a mathematical symbol for the Milky Way. This new symbol was that of the egg, visible in the Mayan hieroglyphs. They called it G. So here we have their, in figure 3, in the Dresden Codex, we can see various zeros and some hieroglyphs. Here we observe how the Maya related mathematics to the symbol represented in the beginning. The Maya closely related the 0 and the Milky Way. In Mayan language, the 0 is called Ge, Ge. The proof can be seen in the figure, which has demonstrated how the Mayan teachers copied the graphic form of the Milky Way and used it to represent the 0 in their mathematics. For this reason, they were the first people on Earth to give real value to the 0. Now, some of Humboldt's language, he's a Mayan daykeeper. He's a little biased. So some of his stuff, he's like, Mayans founded everything. I'm not going to go there. I'm not saying that. But it is interesting to note that they understood the shape of the Milky Way, something that we're just learning about from these different frequencies we're able to now take pictures of in different galaxies. So here we have the revert Ge with great ritual. The 0 or G, as conceived in Mayan and Teotihuacan philosophical thought, was highly revered. This mask from Teotihuacan in the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico depicts the highly sacred symbol of the G on either side of the subject's nose. Unfortunately, it's not properly described to those who come to see it. Guides are apt to tell visitors that the geometric forms are merely decorative. And that was something that he was really, especially personally, we would sit around the fire and talk for hours. He was like, it pains me to no end that what they think is decorative is literally sitting under their nose, is their understanding of the fabric of reality, of the Mayan fabric of reality, and really what he considers, because the Maya and the Aztec, these cultures intermingled, and he believes that they understood that fabric of reality. So here we see in figure 5 the details of the interior patio of the so-called Temple of Columns in Oaxaca, Mexico. Here we see the sacred G within the temple in different forms, both high and low. It is known that new initiates were consecrated in the science religion of these locations and given the secrets and knowledge of the Milky Way through the forms and symbols of the G. And it was a place for teachers and students, and he specifically told me that they would have underworld ceremonies where they would basically go through a resurrection ritual in the style of Quetzalcoatl, and that those that were initiated were known as the serpents or the Quetzalcoatl. So, again, just so many examples, right? In Palenque, Chiapas, the Temple of the Sun, situated at the foot of the hills, Palenque had numerous structures. It features a typical Palenque architecture, the portal pillars, other pyramids, G. Everywhere you see that letter G. And again, because it just seems like it's a motif, people are completely 100% missing the point, right? So here in figure 8, which I love, is actually the sacred G right in the center of the chest of the heart. And we can see the figure of a woman in a meditative attitude with a child peering over her left shoulder. The little clay figure gives us another insight into their culture. The ancestors knew how to worship and meditate in the proximity of their children. Perhaps this was they began their spiritual discipline as infants, and he's correlating and making inferences, but his personal belief is, because he was raised with it, that is what they did. So here's another example. This one is, you can see all the circumpunks around this image. You can see the great letter G around the mouth, and then you can see the great T, or world tree, around the headdress of this individual, who is an underworld god or god of resurrection in Mayan cosmology. So, Mayan words which refer to manifested essence on Earth: Ge, Ge, zero, also known as an egg, also known as the aura around human beings or around life, also known as the Milky Way. Geo, or Gaia, terrestrial globe, world. Gene, egg with a tail. So they talked about the idea of the gene and had a word for it before, modern society. And my etymology is a little rough, so I don't know where gene came from. I probably should have looked that up, but I felt like I was probably going to inundate you guys with a ton of information anyway. But feel free to look it up. It's very interesting that they understood the idea of gene is an egg with a tail, which literally is sperm. So now we've got some ideas of some of their secret initiation practices. They called their sacred god Hunab Ku, right? But Ku was sacred, also known as God, also what they called pyramids. And also it was the first sound a human makes upon arriving in this world. And I just thought that was the coolest thing, that literally as babies, they believe that the baby is coming from the spirit world and emerging into the natural world. The coal is a coccyx. It's a sacred place where solar energy is deposited at the base of the spine. It also means sacred. Also Lil, they call Lil vibration. And the Lil was vibration. So there's a form of this complex word that literally means human vibratory root. So they understood that we were vibrations, that we were rooted to the planet, and that the human beings were basically walking around vibratory roots, which basically, that's my whole talk. That's literally what I've been telling you about their whole world cosmogony, right? That they were connected with the planet, and that they were connected with the solar system and beyond. So they actually have a word, Kundalini. The place that God or the pyramid or vibration or the snake is directly related to the nose, because it's where the breath of the sun god enters, and it's stored in the coccyx. I can't make this stuff up. So according to the Ku, according to the Mayan cosmogony, this is Ku. And it's really important to understand this. And this is the reason I say this. Because when we talk about vibration, when we say, the whole idea, right? Everything is vibration. Well, when you look at a rainbow, what you're looking at is different levels of frequency. So when you have red, you have a slower waveform. When you have orange, it's a faster waveform. If you look at the idea of frequency, like literally frequency is a pyramid. So the Mayans somehow knew this, and they literally said Ku is sacred, God, light, and pyramid, which is just absolutely fascinating, honestly. So this is a refraction photo taken in the 50s. It's one of my favorite images of all time, because when people say everything is vibration, it's so like, it's almost, when we talk esoteric, but in reality, this is a microscopic version of a silicon crystal. And you can see right here, there are literally vibrations or waves of light that are forming physical matter. Now, what's interesting is that notice the pyramids all the way around it. Notice how the center, because what you're looking at is the point of a crystal. So notice at the very center is this like tone or vibration that's been frozen. And this is literally how you're viewing me right now. Your computers, your cell phones, everything are using gold and silver and platinum and quartz. So what you're looking at is how we're able to see each other right now. This is quartz technology. And the Maya were intensely They believed that quartz was a carrier of thought, that basically our thought waves could be enhanced or stepped up by the quartz. But I mean, I can't think of a greater image. And by the way, this is out of the Robert Lawler's Sacred Geometry Workbook. Phenomenal book. If you haven't picked it up, remind me, and I'll talk about the Q&A again. But this is the last page on the Robert Lawler Sacred Geometry Workbook, and I mean, that's mad. That's mass. You're looking at mass at a microscopic level that's vibrating. That's literally what the Maya understood the entire world is. So here are some of the Kisoko images or initiates that were part of the serpent culture. You have Pakavatan, who's talking to the serpent. You've got this interesting correlation, and actually very interesting correlation to the Babylonian motif, where they're also carrying these bags that seem to be ubiquitous around the world. And I won't go into all that, but interesting in and of itself. Also riding or becoming one with the serpent. And then you actually have the serpent motif on the eastern pedestal of the Venus sculpture, again, making a 5-pointed star. So the Naga Maya, picture to the right, were priests that had conquered. They call themselves that. Now, again, I spent 6 months studying various esoteric traditions in India. The Naga Maya in India were people that had conquered the Kundalini force and were basically like initiates or priests that were able to move that force. The Naga Maya in Mayan culture were priests that conquered the 7 serpents equaling the body, and you can count them. There are 7 different heads. To the left of the teachings of Kundalini, an ancient school of thought, a latent serpent's force in the body, called as such because when it's dormant, it's coiled like a serpent at the base of the spine. Popularized in the last 50 years in yoga, according to Kundalini Yoga, the goal of the practitioner is to raise the energy up through the 7 centers or steps of the body. These 7 steps start from the densest vibration, and as they are raised to vibrate at a more accelerated rate. And to my Masonic brethren that are taking the 2nd degree, I'll leave you to uncover more light there. Great reference to this is in Steinmet's book, Freemasonry, Its Hidden Meaning. So here we have that same process, right, where we talked about wavelengths. And again, here are these 9-stepped pyramid that somehow creates this 7-step-down triangle. And the triangle itself was called the Kukulkan, or the serpent force within the body, or the serpent force within nature itself. Now, again, going back to electricity wasn't created, right? It was discovered. Electricity wraps around in that same force. So the Mayans seem to understand that. So this last image here from Ombudsman's book is the G, or sacred essence, and you can see that underneath of this priest. You can see this dotted circumpunct, or O, and that particular version of that is representing energy. So this priest is actually moving an energy field in its hands, and that's what it's representing, according again to Ombudsman and the tradition that he was raised in with the Maya Mexitec culture. So here we have a tracing board from the 1st degree, and you have the sun and moon and star. Well, that last image I showed you, the Kundalini, it's known as the sun and moon force, and the central image is the central pillar or star. So the Kundalini force, or the central force, is, I would correlate directly related to this tracing board. All right. Any questions?
Oh my God, this is amazing.
I'm blown away, Karak.
Just hit us with the question so quickly. I didn't even process that I'm trying to just take this all in right now. I have so many questions. I don't even know what they are yet, you know?
Yeah, for sure. Fire away. I'm happy to help.
I think it's fascinating. The cube and the sphere that we're seeing
100%
in the hands, how closely that relates to the square and compasses that are the primary symbol of Masonry.
Well, and if you look at cubes, they're expansive. If you look at spheres, they're contractive. And if you deal with electricity, right, like anywhere where you're electricity at 90 degrees, you have magnetism. So there's this interesting correlation between this electromagnetic force and the Cuban sphere, that they seem to somehow be correlated. And again, I'm not going to give away kind of the goods, but feel free to check out Walter Russell, because that'll kind of give you some hints as to what the Mayas seem to know.
So I had a question. So I know that you mentioned that quartz could be.
I apologize. I'm sure your name's not Amy, but maybe it is. Maybe your boy who named Sue. I mean, I'm in Nashville, so.
I'm sorry.
But could you let me know what? No, that's okay.
If I get it to load.
Oh, you're good. You're no worries.
Yeah, definitely. So basically, what I was thinking. So, I know that you mentioned that quartz, the structure of it, that the Mayans had thoughts in the fact that it could help enhance consciousness. So I've kind of, I wouldn't necessarily say that I've delved into like metaphysical properties of like gemstones or anything like that. And I can say that I wasn't a real believer in it until I had a large, I believe it was actually a topaz that was like a museum quality stone set in my hands. And it was real strange. You could almost feel the vibrations on it. And it kind of like, you could feel almost like a release or an opening sensation. So I'm not saying that that's necessarily a completely accurate representation of what's happening, but I was just curious what you thought might be causing that. So like you said that it could cause, or they thought that it could cause an expansion of the mind, or kind of like a tool to help create something more. What do you think that they were saying whenever they were regarding that?
So this sphere was given to me by a Mayan day priest. Okay. It looks machined, but it's not. Okay. Like I've actually had it analyzed. It's super old. Specifically what I was told when I would talk to my friends, and I don't know where, I apologize. I had to kind of like bring people in and people left and all that kind of stuff. So I don't know where you came in on the talk, but basically there were circles I ran with that, like the head of the Harvard physics, quantum physics chair was a good friend of mine at one point before I lost touch with him. And he told me that all quartz is piezoelectric. So you're actually looking at a quartz crystal in this last slide. Do you see it now?
Yes, that's what made me think
about it. Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. So that really helped me understand quartz, because I was the same. I'm one of those weird like I believe but I don't like, you know, there's always a skeptic side, right? Which is important. I think it's absolutely important. I think what bowled me over long term was, and some of my brothers who know me well on the Zoom chat can tell you I'm huge into, you know, studying kind of ancient alchemy and those kind of things as well. So I started seeing correlations in all these different societies that were all saying the same thing. And when you start seeing that, it's like, okay, and really I didn't touch on kind of my core beliefs of what I think really was going down with this particular society, because it's not my place to do that right now. But essentially, if you look at that slide, that last slide that I put up again for a reason, what you're looking at is frozen atoms. You're seeing rings of frozen atoms. Now, all quartz is piezoelectric. What that means, piezo means squeeze. So what that means is I can hit a hammer with this thing. Like, let's say that I just want to build a perpetual machine. If I could figure out a way to loop where I have like a hammer, where a hammer could hit this quartz, it would send out small amounts of electricity that are readable from the center, from Hunab-Ku, from the center, literally from nothing. And to give you a correlation, our blood is literally born from the center of our body. So electricity is literally born from the center of these quartz crystals. So what's interesting about it is that if you, like, to me, what I've always laughed at is, when you're looking at your computer part, and I'm in the tech world, when you're looking at a technology, what you're looking at is quartz. You're looking at quartz wrapped around copper, wrapped around gold, you know, wrapped around these things that are conductive, that are creating these currents of electricity that literally are able to have me beam into you. I'm I'm a break dancer, among other things, and I was always tripping out because even the quartz within a speaker, you're literally riding magnetic waves. So like you're conforming to those magnetic waves, right, and riding those magnetic waves. So when you start correlating, the thing is, here's the thing, and this really kind of irks me a little bit. We downplay the idea of the esoteric as this idea that it's ancient. I would actually say that it's more modern. I would actually say that we're coming back into a knowledge base that we've lost a long time ago. And that these and again, like we talked about the idea of the 7 centers, right? In India, they call them chakras. Chakra just means wheel. So what's interesting is in anatomy, these 7 steps literally show up in your nervous system. All of a sudden, there's just a splay of nerves for no apparent reason, and they correlate specifically to where the Hindu people say that, or the Hindu culture, right, says that these chakras exist. So you start seeing these correlations, and the same thing with quartz. If you look at quartz at a grand level, you start to see, okay, maybe there is a power here. When he told me that if I hit quartz, that electricity forms from literally the center, my mind was blown. Because literally the whole idea of the eye, right? The eye or the center, it's in our atoms, it's in the sun, it's in everything. And that's really what the Maya said was God. They said that the center was God. That there was this consciousness that was beyond our physical matter that was literally centering it. And that's where Hunabku lives.
That's fascinating, because something that you mentioned about the quartz being hit by a hammer and emitting a charge. So I have an orgone pyramid. Yeah. I have an orgone pyramid, which is, you know, it has a rose quartz and then copper, and it's all in resin. And I read that so when the resin hardens, it contracts down onto.
It squeezes. It squeezes. You can actually measure the charge.
Yeah, it causes that quartz to begin emitting a charge, which is fascinating.
100%. That's exactly what it does. Yep. And again, I'm sorry, I know you're not Amy. What is your name?
My name is Nathan. I'm a member over at Snow Lodge, the same place.
Awesome.
Yep. Definitely, and I appreciate you hosting this seminar, man. I've definitely thoroughly enjoyed it. It's shed a lot of light on a lot of stuff, man. It's awesome.
I'm really grateful to have done it, and honestly, I give all the credit to Warren, because at the end of the day, I just showed him, hey man, there's some correlation, you know, and he was like, dude, you got to do a talk on it. I'm like, all right, fine, I'll put some slides together. I just want to say one last thing, right? What I was trying to convey, and again, I apologize, I don't know where you came in on the talk. What I was trying to convey is that there is this electromagnetic force, and actually in the Hebrew Bible, it's talked about, right? The idea of Moses. Moses was an Egyptian initiate. So he was an initiated in the Egyptian mysteries, wherever those came from. And at the end of the day, he went out into the desert for 40 days. And if you look at it from that perspective, he kind of like gathered what he had been initiated at and then took it to the next level. Well, he went to a plant and said, you know, what is the name of God? And they said, you know, the plant said, I am that I am, right? The burning bush. Well, man, that's an energy field around a plant. Like if you start to look at this scientifically, you realize that the energy field, well, that's what the Maya said. They said that the energy field, this force field around things. What's interesting is science is still Newtonian. We're like in our healing and everything, we're still billiard ball. And what we have to do is start understanding you have an aura that's measurable. Literally, I can measure it, right? I can measure the aura of you. I can measure and that has a frequency. And that frequency has a color spectrum that's correlated to that frequency. And those frequencies are 7 in nature, and then it begins again. So when you start to see these correlations, and for the people that are on the talk that are brothers, maybe there's some more light there. For those who aren't, I mean, just look it up. We all have these egg-shaped frequency things around us that you can't see because your visible light spectrum can only see so high and so low in a frequency range. My correlation is that these ancient cultures, learned about, first of all, the power of the pineal gland. So I could literally give a talk on the pineal gland alone, right? But the power of the pineal gland is such that once it's awakened, it is its own mind's eye. And so therefore, like, it has rods and cones. It has its own thing, completely separate from the rest of the body. And yet somehow all these ancient cultures said it was the master gland. And I'll leave it there.
I have a question. So how do we, with this knowledge of an electromagnetic aura existing around each of us and among many things, what can we do with this information to perhaps change our lives? I mean, what can we pull out of this that's practical? How do we take what we've learned and apply it to improve ourselves day to day?
Brother, that's like a whole other talk, right? Like some of the experiments I got into, because you and I, this is why we're so wavelength, right? Like you and I think exactly the same. I started playing around, there comes a point where it's like, okay, so many different knowledge bases all saying the same information. Fine. Let's say this is all real. Now what? Well, I started playing around with field theory, and I trained over 500 people in Oregon to see the energy field around plants, et cetera, right? But then we took it further and started playing around with fruits and different foods and literally like feeling the field, because everything has a field. So feeling the field around these different fruits and things like that. And what would happen is that certain foods, and because I know you, so I know you eat clean, right? Certain foods would feel expansive, and we would feel it immediately in the nervous system, right? And then other foods would start shutting things down that had expanded. And you and I can talk offline a little bit more about that because it's pretty extensive. And again, I don't want to bore these brothers with another hour-long talk where I just sit and, right? But at the end of the day, there's actually a lot that's practical. It's really, honestly, what the mystics and ancients would say, including the Maya, it is the key to ancient science. It is a key to like greater science, field theory.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think I can definitely relate this to a very practical lesson that I've learned, which is a very common quote that you guys have also all probably heard. You become the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. Talking about like how toxic people will bring us down and who we spend our time with will bring us up. When we spend time with those people, we're quite literally sharing our fields with these individuals, and our minds are not separated as they appear to be in our skulls. But when we are with these people, we're actually coming together and sharing mental wavelengths. And that's why we become the people we spend time with, is because we're connecting on that deep metaphysical level. Although we appear to be separated by matter, in reality, we're far more connected than we realize. And I think that it's, Tom asked a very interesting question, Karak. He said, are these egg-shaped orb frequencies the same things that show up on some photographs that photographers describe as spookies, like orbs, pictures of ghosts and whatnot?
So, I mean, I would refer to, and if I'm frozen, all of a sudden my Zoom meeting is not responding. Can you guys hear me still?
Yeah, I can hear you, but you are frozen.
I can hear you.
Okay, cool. The answer is I don't have all the answers. The other answer is that there are more things in heaven and earth than in your philosophy, Horatio, right? Like, who knows? I think that Leonardo da Vinci had a very interesting methodology that I've tried to espouse to, which is fumato, which is up in smoke. The idea that you only know what you know, and there could be a lot that you don't know that you don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that this has been fantastic. Thank you, everybody who came and joined to be a part of this. If you want to hear more about these things, go to NashvilleKSA.com. Go ahead and like the Nashville Scottish Rite Facebook page. Go ahead and add me on Facebook. Some of you guys are probably here from a post that I made among a number of Facebook groups. Go ahead and add me. I can put you on the list to receive things like this. Steve, you look like you have something to say. Do you?
Warren. I'm going to hang out for a little while for anybody that wants to have an in-depth conversation. I know some people.
Steve knows me well. We'll talk for hours and have some whiskey.
Now, I've already been having some whiskey, but Karak, hey, I want to thank you first for coming on, brother. This was incredible. I just had lights going off in my head the whole time. Some of the interesting things that as they had the word Gaia or Gaia for world, which corresponds with the Greek Gaia for earth. How could two cultures who never coexisted together have this? And I don't want to say it, but I'm just going to say ancient aliens just for a laugh. But hey, you blew my mind, man.
Nice, awesome. Well, I'm honored, and that was awesome to be able to do this.
Yeah, so I have a question.
Ahead,
I would like a copy of this presentation. I don't know if it's going to be posted anywhere, just to look over these slides, if they would be available.
Yes, it will be posted.
I can send out the deck as well, Warren, if you'd like. But I think that he did record this.
Yeah, so we're going to have all this recorded. We're going to publish this. So I just put my email in the chat. It's warrensturry@gmail.com. Go ahead and email me if you want to receive a copy of this recording. We're going to put it probably on YouTube, I would imagine. And we can ensure that you get that link when that's posted. However, just make sure that you get in touch with me either through my email, which is preferred, or through Facebook. Add me on Facebook if you saw me post in a Facebook group. If you get in touch with me and you let me know that you want this, I will make sure that I get it to you.
Hey guys, I have a question, Warren, if you don't mind. Is there still time?
Oh, of course, yeah.
All right, so just real quick, the egg-shaped field around your body, or am I correct in calling it Taurus?
You said it.
I would say that would be in the force. Is that what you asked? You kind of cut out there for a second.
Okay, sorry. The egg-shaped field around us, would you call that the Taurus?
Yes, absolutely. That is what it is. It's around the earth. It's around cells. It's around your muscle. It's around every organ. And each organ has its own field that seems to correlate to other fields.
Okay,
yep.
Wonderful. Now, how do you relate that to the recent 6 feet apart rule that has been applied almost everywhere?
Oh, wow. Good question. Very good question.
So I actually have a different take on this. And actually, I was, how do I be politically correct? I have a take on this, that this year is either one of the worst years for people, or it's one of the most profound years for people, because they're able to go within and do some house cleaning and really decide what they want to be, what they want to do, how they want to relate. I relate that 6-foot rule is you are literally stuck in your own bubble. And interestingly enough, the Maya actually talk about that as well. That was part of the singularity, that we all needed to understand that we independently are powerful, and that collectively we are very powerful.
I'm also
for me personally, it has been one of those years that I see it in so many people that it has not. And I feel what you're saying. I feel like it's one of those situations, you make it what it is.
So, for example, for me, I spend time. I'm huge into songwriting in the Nashville community, but I'm a writer and a vocalist. But I've never played an instrument. I've taught myself guitar and piano. I worked on my gardens. I spent time with my children. Like, it was a year of focus of what do I want to see in the world and what do I want to picture, and really focusing on one of my inventions Warren knows about that I'm working on. That was when I started that. So it really was either like heavily distracting or heavily going within.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This call has been super informational and something that I could have just wished for, and it happened. So thank you very much.
So,
hey, Warren, do we have time for one more question?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Well, let me, I want to backtrack to the heart math section for just a moment and tell Karak that I think I'm one of the few people in Nashville that's certified in the heart math interventions. And this business of the square and the sphere correlate pretty much to the brain and the heart. The brain
right.
containing our intellectual, I guess, thought capacity, and the heart being the root of our emotional capacity through the neurites that are prevalent around the base of the great vessels emanating from the heart. And with respect to the question of the torus, there is an electromagnetic impulse that emanates from every organ of the body, as was said.
That's right.
But the electromagnetic field emanating from the heart has been measured out as far as 20 feet. And the only reason that it measures 20 feet is because our instrumentation does not exist to measure it farther.
100%.
But I can tell you this, that there are a group of brothers that have been experimenting with this torus and the application of harmony between thought and feeling. And those brothers are here in Nashville. And we have experimented with causing positive effect in various circumstances for each other. And we've had overwhelming success. We've had a couple of failures where fundamentally nothing happened. But in most instances where someone has volitionally asked for that intervention, we have had remarkable successful outcomes. And I can tell you frankly that it has to do with job searches, it has to do with financial affairs, it has to do with relationships between men and women, husbands and wives. It has to do with search for this and that and the other. So it's been pretty much across the board. It's had a lot to do with people's health and hospitalizations, surgeries, and various medical interventions. And the results of it have been very significant. So the point of that is that this electromagnetic field of which we're talking and of which the heart emanates far larger. For instance, the brain emanates an electromagnetic field that you can measure on electroencephalography, but it's very teeny, very tiny beyond the surface of the scalp, whereas the heart emanates out many feet, and we think that the heart field actually emanates out infinitely. And by that, I mean, I guess it's pretty bizarre to think that your heart, balancing heart, feeling, and mind, thought, could have an impact on another planet, but I suspect that it probably could, because I don't think there's any reason to consider that the impulse would be diminished in any way. It seems, and if you look at the heart math experiments and the US Army experiments, you'll see that these findings from the Institute of Heart Math have been validated and observed across great distances where people's DNA has been found to wind and unwind according to the harmony existing between their emotion and their thoughts. So that's a very significant thing. And it's when we talk about the business of heart math and the business of the human torus emanating from the heart, it gives a whole new meaning to the business of a Masonic token. I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole because I don't know who all's on the line, but that's a very significant thing that the heart math people discovered, that if one were in a state of coherence and he was wired to an EEG measuring brainwave, and the other were wired to an EKG measuring cardiac electromagnetic pulse, and they were to simply grasp hands, the one wired to an EEG would show the QRS complex of the other guy's, the other person's heart electromagnetic pulse in his brainwave. And so it's transmissible, and it gives a whole new meaning to how one Mason might recognize another in the light or in the dark. So
That's right.
I'll shut up.
That's correlating to kind of Brother Driver. This is correlating to how without, because again this isn't tiled, right? But how there are certain correlations that seem to fit with some of our philosophy within the lodge, right? Without going into in depth the idea of the harmony of the brothers, and honestly, scientifically, how by being empowered in that way, that our lives start to change for the better. So pretty profound. And we'll have to talk offline, because you seem like a cat that I probably would enjoy hanging out with for a bit.
Well, I think we'd have some interesting discussions. So we have some occasional fires over here that we sit around and, talk about such things. So I know Warren knows how to reach you. So, and I'm pretty easy to find.
Yep. Be careful what you wish for if you're going to sit down with Brother Driver. It's just be careful what you wish for.
Now, who said that?
Oh, you know who said that? Who are you talking? You know who said that?
I don't recognize the voice, to be truthful.
Oh, well, I've been texting you all night, so that should tell you.
Oh, God. Is this Jason?
Yes.
Oh, my God. Well, you're the guy that stands in the damn garage for hours talking, aren't you?
Sure. Absolutely.
Hey, is Stafford still on the line? I guess not.
Stafford is not here.
Sounds like he's gone. Okay.
I think that's something that Dr. Driver just mentioned is fascinating. So he was talking about a group of Masons coming together and essentially collectively using their individual wills to create results for each other. Anybody who's read some old school self-help literature written by, I can't remember his name now. It's he wrote the book Think and Grow Rich. His name is Napoleon Hill.
Napoleon Hill.
And he talks about the Mastermind Principle, which is the idea that when you have a desire alone, the human mind is a powerful tool. However, when multiple human minds come together in coherence and direct their energies towards a common goal, the power that is now being put into the manifestation of that goal is amplified exponentially. And I think it's just interesting. This is just another reason why we should be involved in our communities, why it's not good for us. Now, certainly good, solitude is important for coming up with creative thought. But when we get together with people in lodge or in other fraternal organizations, maybe you're in the Rotary Club, maybe you go to Toastmasters, whatever it is, spend time with like-minded individuals. Share your magnetic field with their magnetic fields. Share ideas, get ideas from them and give ideas to them. Because when we do this, when we get involved with groups who all share common goals and common purposes, we notice very quickly that in our own personal lives, things take off. When you get involved in a group of people like that and they want you to succeed and you want them to succeed, generally everybody starts succeeding. And it's just really important to keep these things in mind. That's all that I got to say about that. I had a really good time on this call and it was fascinating.
Is anybody else hanging out for a while?
I am, because I would love to ask you just one question. First of all, thank you for doing this. This is amazing. And
my honor.
The whole spiral thing you brought up, and it brings the whole the serpent around the serpent around the staff, the whole 9 yards. But my question to you is, why would you say it's G and not 6? Being 6 is so much more prevalent in music and history, and there's just more history to 6 than G. And I'll go off and take your question. Your answer.
The Maya actually talk about this and say that what they consider the spiral, they call G. My correlation to it is, and this is actually from Albert Pike and Mackey, they really didn't, they're like, this is an Americanized thing. We don't really know where the G comes from, which is not true. What's interesting is that there's Freemasonry in the 1800s, and honestly, it's like America and what they had, and the books they had, and then what was in Europe and so forth. And so now there's this new Masonry, right, where we're global, information is starting to be collected, and we're starting to be able to correlate stuff that they didn't really have access to. But the G has been around for a long time. There's a really awesome set of books that I can give to Warren to just give as a bibliography that go into imagery from like the 1700s and everything in Europe that show the G. So the G is something that and again, one of my backgrounds is in art, and knowing the golden ratio and knowing the spiral and knowing that's how I really approached it. But again, understanding the body too, right? The anatomy of the body and seeing how muscles literally spiral around each other, even at spindle level, and electricity spirals around, and literally everything in matter spirals around. Well, the spiral, another form of that is the 5-pointed star. So not correlating the G to a spiral when clearly the 5-pointed star creates the spiral, to me is like sacrilege, right? But again, these are my philosophies and my thoughts, and based on the Mayan cosmogenesis. But that's why we gave the talk on the G. Now, 6 is interesting because 6 in a lot of cultures, the etymology is sex, right? Like sextet. And if you look at it, it's 3 forces, 3 other forces, or the positive, negative, and neutral force, and the positive, negative, neutral force combining to create something greater. And I'll leave that alone.
All right. Do not pass go. Do not collect 2.3 trillion.
Cool.
Joe Biden's infrastructure is stuck in neutral.
Hey, if I may ask a question.
Now, I heard a brother, I'm sorry, I just want to say one thing. I heard a brother say that the 47th problem of Euclid also points to the first problem of Euclid, and that somehow that relation has to do with the golden ratio. And I would say that there's definitely some things related to that. But if you're looking at, if this 5-pointed star and this G represents God, right? Well, the idea is that God, the generative principle, has a signature that literally is in all matter, and the Mayan knew that.
Real quick, did I hear you correctly talk about the pineal gland as possibly the third eye? I'm not sure I'm saying that correctly, but is that kind of the idea here as far as that goes?
Yes, it has rods and cones, just like your normal eyes do, and it's shaped just like an eye.
That's amazing. I never heard that before, but now it's like a whole new world of ideas and philosophies have been opened up to me tonight with this amazing presentation. So thanks, appreciate that.
Absolutely, and to just go a little bit further, right, without giving too much away, if my brothers have been through the third degree, there's some light to be found there with a specific thing that happens related to the third degree, and I'll leave that there.
Understood.
So
brother.
honored. Thank you so much for letting me present. I really am appreciative.
Absolutely. Does anybody have anything else that they want to ask any of us? I mean, anybody can say whatever they want to say right now. Does anybody have any other statements, any questions, any concerns, any jokes?
I have a question, Karen.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Steve. Hey, so looking at some of the stuff that you presented tonight and seeing how it correlates with the belief systems and practices of other cultures that at least we have no evidence that the Mayans were ever introduced to. What's your thoughts on the explanation for that?
Oh, I am a proponent for an antediluvian theory. The Mayan actually talk about it in their codex, specifically the Popol Vuh. But actually, and this is interesting, and I didn't want to go into it too much. I knew you were going to bring this out on me. Like, specifically, there was a brother in the 1800s who went down to the Mayan lands, and the Maya took to him. And usually, you know, here's the thing, and again, comparative religion background, right? Like, studied all religions for my job, for the military. So, like, I am, and I'm not trying to offend any brothers that are Christian. I am a big fan of Christianity, but there is an historical precedent for this idea that Christianity precedes everything, and so therefore, like, all the knowledge base of a culture, just stamp it down because they're heathens, right? So that has basically, I mean, literally, and this is actually correlates to what I'm going to say next. That has literally decimated, and in some ways, like, dissolved the knowledge base. And so you have to look at these correlations. A book that I'm hoping to get soon is on the Mayan Kichi culture, written by this brother from the 1800s who spent time, and they opened up to him. And they showed him a temple and showed him inscriptions and said, we came from Atlan, and it sunk, and we, like, here we are. And so, you know, the antediluvian or Atlantean theory seems to correlate to other cultures globally. Now, if you want an interesting thing, there's a pyramid in Mexico that's identical to the Great Pyramid. It is on the same latitudinal longitudinal line as the Great Pyramid in Egypt. There are also pyramids that appear to be in China and possibly in Italy. So there's this global pyramid culture. You know, I don't think that you have, and again, what's interesting, Graham Hancock said this best, I think, that when the Europeans came and started to decimate, literally started to take the stones, and this happened with this temple. That's why there's no knowledge of it except for this one brother's writing, right? But literally took apart the temple to build their churches. And in that process, lost, in a book and stone, lost so much knowledge that the Maya had. But I don't think that the Maya had this knowledge base because, you know, it was a cool idea or whatever. You know, there's too much correlation. So what's interesting is, like, what I was trying to point to, right, is that the solar lunar energy and the, you know, those middle force that seems to be in these different cultures, well, you find it in the staff of Hermes, you find it in the Kundalini of India, but interestingly enough, they have the word Kundalini in their culture, Kuntan Lily. I mean, you can't. There's too much etymology, right? That's almost identical.
Well, yeah, I would agree with you, and I didn't want to put you on the spot on that, but from all of my personal research and everything, I'm in agreement of an antediluvian civilization as well that had a, not necessarily, you know, from a technology as we understand it today, but from a technology that tapped into the cosmic consciousness to a much higher level that allowed greater feats than what man alone has been able to figure out.
And you can look at both the Mayan buildings, or you can look at Egypt. There are, like, you know, when a modern machinist or engineer looks at some of this stuff, and they're like, we can't even do what they're doing in granite. Like, how did they do that? Now, Egyptologists are still trying to, like, suppress that. But, you know, the thing is, the Mayan lands, maybe 5% have been discovered. Right, yeah. Most of it's still under jungle. And we're looking at probably in time capsules of like 100, 200 years. Same thing in Egypt, right? 3% has been uncovered. Right. So really, these are time capsules that are going to tell a greater story. And you can only suppress things so much. I know that there was a hieroglyph in Egypt, for example, that has 2 tuning forks with a bunch of lines between them. And you know, I had a friend of mine who told me that because there's Egypt, right? And then there's
Yeah.
Chem, which
Right.
like is like what Egypt was called, which alchemy, chemistry, the land of Chem. So
Right.
there's Chem and there's Chemites, and those people, they're like, yeah, we learned this stuff from an ancient culture. The Babylonians, you know, Manly P. Hall goes into it pretty deeply. But there were these cultures, and what's interesting, Steve, is that one hieroglyph that I showed you, the Mayan culture with the bag,
Yeah.
it's almost identical to the same bag in Babylon. Like literally, as if it's a device or some kind of thing that these priests were bringing with them to start culture again. So I would say that this brother who was in the 1800s, who literally was a brother, but they told him, here's our mythos, and here, you know, this is what we believe. I would say that there's some accuracy to that and should be looked at have more heavily.
I would agree.
Hey, I've got a quick question. This is Jason DeLoss here. Can you hear me well? I'm in my car.
Yeah, you're good.
Oh, okay. How about the prehistoric tribes of the lands we live on now, like the Mississippian or the Anasazi or all those of the Southwest? Is there any correlation as far as like because they were mound builders as well, which was not pyramids, but in concept.
Well, here's the interesting thing. History is written by those who are there to pick up the pieces, right? So I can't tell you what the mound culture had when it was first uncovered. I can tell you what's left that we can talk about. So the fact of the matter is that there's something I still haven't visited yet, but I want to, called the Serpent Mounds in Ohio that can only be seen from space. And the mound culture built them. There's the mound culture of Nashville that literally, and here's the thing, when I was studying with the Aborigine, they pulled me aside and I was super, you know, like, oh, society. And, you know, and they said, well, what do you see? And they pointed at the city in Hobart. And I said, oh, I see Europeans taking over it, you know, and they said, yeah, that's true for sure. Because the Aborigine are not really well liked or respected, unfortunately, in Australia like they should be. And I said, you know, this and that. And they said, okay, well, here's the thing. We see the same thing you see, but beyond that, all these places where there's like major epicenters, that's where we used to gather because the dreaming was the strongest. So your people, because obviously it looked European, your people built on top of the strongest dreaming and created epicenters where we used to gather. And that was like that was like, you know, I still think about that on a daily level because if you look, and for my brothers that are in Nashville, you look at Nashville, we built on top of the Mound Society. There's a huge society in Nashville and in Memphis that we built on top of. So that same energy field is still here. And I'll leave it at that. I will say that the Mound culture, Pleiades, Orion, Sirius, all the same things seem to be correlated in all these different ancient cultures, whether it's India or, and again, I studied, the last trip I had was in South Africa, studied under the Zulu. They all talk about it. And I can't see how all these different societies that are supposedly independent from each other all seem to know the same information.
That's great. I love it.
Yeah, sucralose. That's great.
I think what you
Chef
just
Bill Mullins.
Eric, you talked about how all these people from these different parts of the world all knew the same information. All that I can think of is the fact that you told us that the Earth has an aura and so do we. And our auras are satellites to the Earth's aura. And we're able to send and receive information through the Earth's aura to other people. The whole idea of collective consciousness, that's the only idea that could, you know, make any sense to me about how these people on other sides of the planet had the same ideas and came up with the same symbols, was this interconnectedness of thought, which really all comes down to these magnetic fields that you're talking about with the slide that you got pulled up right here.
That's right. And specifically, I think Dr. Driver wants to say something, but really quick, specifically, the Maya didn't see a human being And I want to make a correlation. When the Egyptians, when the Europeans came, when the Europeans came to the Mayan land, the Maya were already pretty much decimated. So their traditions, their way of life, their understanding had been lost. And they said as much. We don't really know what this does. We don't really know what this is. We're kind of holding on to our culture. Graham Hancock says it best that they seem to, the human sacrifices and the heart and the pure, so all that stuff was real, but it was like at the end of their society after they had basically lost their way. And I think that it's an interesting thing because what the Maya say at the heart of their cosmogony is that the planet as a whole, and let me backtrack this, that we are like a cell on the planet, and that the planet as a whole, the idea of Gaia theory that we have now today, right? If you know Gaia theory, the planet as a whole is alive, it's sentient, and we're part of that sentience, and that we're connected to that sentience. And to Dr. Driver's point, I believe that the science of the future is going to start measuring frequencies that we're not measuring right now. And so therefore, with the measurements and instruments that we have now, we're able to detect what we can detect. But the Maya believed that their heart stream, and this is an interesting correlation because I always correlate this to certain passages, again, that kind of mystical side of me, right, with the Bible, where Jesus says, I and my Father are one. Well, the Maya said, when you become one with Hunab-Ku, which is the center of the galaxy. Now, if you think about this, if your heart is somehow this bridge between our sun and then the greater sun, those people that were able to connect and become Quetzalcoatl consciousness, as they like to call it, which was literally a Christ-like figure for them. It was raised from the dead, the whole thing. That somehow, that they were somehow like this greater body or emanation of like a higher consciousness, that they were aware of their higher consciousness and they were able to use that to perform miracles. And I'll leave that there.
Fascinating. Simply fascinating.
Can I ask maybe two more questions? Okay. With the whole aura thing and the energy thing, if the Earth was that way, would land have any effect on that?
So, first of all, if you're talking about ley lines, then yes, those are mapped and they are electromagnetic lines in the Earth. But I'm going to ask you to kind of rephrase your question because I'm not. It's a little. I'm a little convoluted on it, and that might be me after hours of talking.
I understand because ask my wife. I'm the devil's advocate.
You're good.
As
no
the
worries.
plate tectonics change, would it change the aura?
In other words, does the distribution of the land mass on the surface, as we know it, if that shifted, would that affect the magnetic field? I mean, I know it's going to affect the Earth's magnetic field, but
so I'd like to correlate it differently because this is still Newtonian thinking, and that's kind of what I wanted to have us talk about. Right? Is that we're still stuck in the Newtonian concept. So my summation is that field theory is the envelope for matter. So when you're seeing plate tectonic shift, that shifted in the field first, and not the other way around.
So, Karak, you're saying that
affect the inside.
You're saying that the land is not the cause; the land is the effect.
Yes.
Right. Yeah.
The physical body that you see, for example, the idea of the egg, right? The physical body that you see is the last physicalness of form that mystics and psychics, etc., right, around the world, priests and initiates, have all talked about, that the field around the body has the beginnings of disease, has the correlation to health, and that essentially when the field shifts for the better or worse, the body shifts.
So what we see as matter is the ultimate end result of a wide and intricate series of spiritual occurrences taking place beforehand. Is that what you're saying, Karak?
Basically, that there's an envelope of frequency, and that what we're seeing, your eyes play tricks on you, right? Like literally, you think what you're seeing is solid. It's just sped up at such a rate of vibration that it appears solid to your form.
Exactly. I was going to say there's so much basically empty space to think in Newtonian ways, but they vibrate in so much that it looks like solidity. But then you look at when you get into like the quantum physics of things, where it's like, well, it's kind of a gaseous thing that it goes around atoms.
Plasma.
Yeah, exactly.
Plasma.
Right. And
which is light.
Right, exactly. So, but because you can't really guess where the electrons are, they're trying to give some physical form to what they're thinking. And that's okay. I understand that need to do that. But what I'm going to go back to where the plate tectonics, where you said, the field will shift and then the land will follow, or the physical will follow. I mean, you think about the electromagnetic field that it creates, would that be drawing things across?
Wouldn't that blow Europa out of the water? I mean, that was there before people, right?
The idea of Pangea or Europa, if you're going to go with that theory, is the idea of a landmass that's basically embryonic.
Before people. So
right, but the people would be the last end manifestation. It wouldn't necessarily blow Europa out or Pangea, but it would say that there was something that held it together at some point, then that started to shift, and then Pangea was shifted after that.
So if you're going to go with Gaia theory, then there are two other levels to this, right? There's the idea of the technosphere, that the idea that we're creating a sphere of technology in order to create a ubiquitous, interconnected culture. Once that happens, which I would say that like a good chunk of the earth is in that process. Now, what we don't understand is the earth itself is making us do that. That's the concept, that the earth is asking for a technosphere so that basically we create unity consciousness. In that process of the technosphere, the noosphere, which is the global mind consciousness, is also increasing and becoming more interconnected, and that the global mind, literally the mind of the planet as a whole, including all human thought, is actually part of the planet, and that we are literally a cell or organism on the planet. Again, this is Gaia theory. This isn't my theory, but the Maya, they would say that would be accurate.
All I see in my head now is from Men in Black with the aliens playing marbles with the Earth and the galaxy.
Essentially.
So
like cells are basically little galaxies.
That's what's in my head. Yeah, that's what's in my head.
The Hindu tradition, well, that's why the Russian nesting doll, right, was one of the slides I used. The Hindus have this tradition with Krishna, which is their form of Christ, and as the preserver is what they called it, which is a manifestation of Vishnu. And the Hindus have a tradition. Krishna was a little boy and was playing around with the milkmaids, and he was very mischievous. And so the milkmaids were like, give us, like stop playing around with the cows and whatnot. And he took the key to the stall for the cows. And when he was getting chased, he gulped the key. He swallowed the key. And so the milkmaids went to open up his mouth to grab the key, and inside all they saw were universes. So much in that correlation, right? That seems to be what quantum physics and what new biology and all these things, it's all field theory. A really good book is Morphogenetic Fields by Rupert Sheldrake. If Brother Driver is on, I'm sure he's read it or knows about it. But amazing, very technical book on field theory and its relation to biological organisms.
Too much for me to think about tonight. I have no more questions yet, but I'm sure I will. I've got to absorb this a little bit.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Very much.
A lot of food for thought. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Happy to be here. Happy to be of service.
And Warren, Karak, I know you're up at, I call it the convenience store lodge, the 7-Eleven. Yeah, right. So, and you're also, Warren, you're over at West Nashville. It's
West Nashville Phoenix.
West Nashville Phoenix, right? I remember when there was a West Nashville and a Phoenix.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, I do not remember that day. I don't. That was a long time ago, I think.
Actually, it was only a few years ago, about 7 years ago. By the way, if you don't know me, I'm the past master secretary down at Hiram and Franklin. So,
Cool.
Brother Driver's a member down there. So, we will see each other along with some of these other guys when we start getting back together. Now that they've let us do some things, jeez.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you're welcome to come. We're having an EA degree for the brothers that are in Nashville. We're having an EA degree next week at John B. Garrett. My brain is now fried. Well,
yeah, wait. What day is that? Because they're next Friday night. There's Friday night and Saturday night. There's one in Fairview, and then Hiram will be having one at the end of the month. And then we've got, because we've been everybody's so backed up there. I understand. If you get Tommy Clark's 3 Knocks email, I think there were something like 50 different degrees listed.
Yeah.
In the next.
This coming Thursday, and it's from a candidate whose brother, his father and his grandfather were both Master Masons at West Nashville before it was Phoenix, I'm not sure which, for quite a few years. So it's going to be a pretty special ceremony. Come one, come all. We'd love to have you. It'll be this coming Thursday. So obviously not today, but next Thursday, a week from tomorrow, I should say.
Cool. Is it going to be at? It's going to be at West Nashville Phoenix.
It's going to be at John B. Garrett.
Oh, it's going to be John B. Garrett. I'm getting them mixed up. There we go.
Sidco Drive. You're fine.
I know where they are. I've been by both of them, so I know where they are. So
nice. All right. Any other questions, or does anyone just want to hang out and talk? I feel like I'm just sitting here kind of waiting at this point.
I'm good to hang out if anybody just wants to talk. So.
I'm honestly a little bit surprised I didn't hear anything about any goats, man. I thought that was a crucial component to what we did.
I hate that so much. It's okay though.
Got one in the backyard.
The goat of Mendes is another symbol for the golden proportion. So I could
please,
correlate
no,
it.
Please, no. Just no. I have a hard enough time explaining that away anyway.
You're good.
I'm curious as far as the thoughts of everyone having a similar deity in every culture, it seems. Someone born of a virgin, someone that dies is resurrected. It's very interesting coming from a Christian background and then walking into the Scottish Rite and getting slapped up the side of the head with all these other understandings.
The fifth degree alone should wear you out with all the books of the law that are on the altar. I work in that degree, so there's like 7 different books. So
yeah, and they all seem to have someone that died of a virgin and happened to be of some deity.
Well, and along those lines, since we're just having conversations here, I've heard from a brother who was in Jerusalem on business or something and wanted to go visit a lodge. And I don't know if anybody's ever been to Jerusalem, but evidently I've never been there, but from what I understand, the addressing, how you get to an address or a house or a building is not exactly straightforward. It can be very complicated. He had a hard time finding where this lodge was that he heard was having a meeting. So he called the Grand Lodge there and he got in touch with somebody. He goes, "Oh, actually there's a meeting tonight at a different lodge here in town. I'll pick you up," And so he said, "It's great." So he picked him up and he goes, "Now it's a Muslim lodge. Is that okay?" He goes, "Sure, that's fine." So he went to the lodge and he said, because they were in Jerusalem and this lodge, although it was started by Muslims, it had Muslims and Jews and Christians as members. So on the altar, they opened the Bible, then they opened the Torah, then they opened the Quran. They were all stacked open on the altar during the meeting. And I was like, nothing speaks to what Masonry should be more than what he was telling me in that little anecdote. And he goes, and everybody just had a meeting and then had some food, and then went home. And that was the end of that. So
That's wonderful.
exactly. But that's what you're talking about. We all know we're all kind of, we're all created by one almighty parent, right? So,
but why is it that we all have to destroy? Every book says that there can only be one, and
well, and I know he mentioned it earlier in that, where Christianity has, well, these are heathens, they can't be this. Well,
so does the Muslim faith, where they
you think about what went on in the Middle East when the ISIS took over some areas that had Christian statues, and they just destroyed stuff, right?
And Buddhist statues. I actually spent time in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Right.
The USS Cole was part of my battle group, and we got bombed. So I saw some interesting combat I wasn't expecting to see in my job, because my job is also to be a part of the chaplain's, as a chaplain's bodyguard. So that was fun. But there were Buddhist, very beautiful, very, very intense, large Buddhist statues in Afghanistan and Pakistan. It's one of the first things that ISIS did. Here's the thing. I would say that the correlation is something along the lines of this. What's the first thing that Hitler did when he took over power?
Well, he got rid of any organized anything. That's
right.
Be a threat to his.
But then he created a ton of new art. So art has this symbolism, right? I mean, we talk about symbolism in the lodge for those that are brothers, right? So the symbolism of any the zeitgeist of any collective thought consciousness starts to drive and starts to influence manifest consciousness. Now, again, the reason I always, not because I'm like, I've got this and I did this, but just to give you backgrounds so you don't think that I'm just like making this stuff up. At the end of the day, if you look at the Christian historical record, there was Christ saying, red letter, it's still in King James, saying, I will found my church upon you, pointing to Peter, who was one of the disciples of Christ, one of the 12 disciples.
Yes.
Paul was Saul of Tarsus, a known hitman who was literally taking out Pharisees and Sadducees, right? And ultimately had a vision of Christ 50 years after Christ died.
Yep.
So the version of Christianity that we have today, it's very interesting. Thomas Jefferson, who I don't believe was a brother, but was a mystic, said that he took out everything in the Bible that wasn't red letters. So with the New Testament, he just took all Jesus' sayings. He had a red letter Bible, right? He cut out, which is incredible and profound, because there's incredibly profound things that point to a greater level. But historically, I went through seminary essentially in the military. Historically, there was something called the New Testament correctors who came in after 50 AD and started changing passages to make it more appealing. Constantine created a whole set of Nicene Creed, right? The fathers of Nicene.
I was going to say the Council of Nicaea is where I was headed with that.
So you have all of this. I'm going to say two other points, and then I'll give the floor up again. You have all of this. Now, here's the thing. If you have a religion, and I do believe that Jesus Christ was an incredible avatar of such power and profound awakening, that he literally awoke on the planet. But if you have all this, you have him saying, literally, you are gods, right? You are creators. So you are sons and daughters of the Most High. And if you read the Aramaic version of it, it's even more incredible and profound, and in very Mayan cosmology, Egyptian cosmology. And I encourage brothers to read the Aramaic version of the Lord's Prayer and all that stuff. But you have this version of Christianity, right? You have, which Christ just means light bearer, by the way, a bearer of light.
Right.
So you have this version of Christianity that says you're all just as powerful as the king. And then, or the emperor, right? And then you have Saul's Christianity, which says, hey, that guy we killed on the cross was the only son of God. So everybody, and then you have these like original sin came in. So you have these like indoctrinations happen. This is historic. These indoctrinations happening that help correlate that. Well, listen, if I'm the ruler of an empire, and already it's been shown historically, the Essenes and the Gnostics were like decimated. If I was a ruler of an empire, whose Christianity do I want? The guy that's like, you can literally tap into the universe and become like, like a Tesla, or the guy that's like, hey, we killed the guy, so for the rest of our lives, we're gonna have to repent because we're all in sin. Yeah. So it was a form of control.
No, exactly. Well, I know what I was getting to earlier, alluding to, is that a lot of it came down to when it started to become the organization, right? They organized and they started putting down the creeds and everything and the dogma that came with Catholicism or Protestants, and things like that. And, and Martin Luther challenging everything. I mean, you think about that when, I think back to just from where my belief starts. And I will say that I was raised a Christian and I still believe in that mythos, and I will call it that for the most part, because it is allegorical, it is a symbolic thing for me. But people always talk about, well, how do you relate creation, creationism with science? And I'm like, well, you try to explain the Big Bang Theory to someone about 6,000 years ago. Okay, go ahead, have fun, with that. Okay, so if you think about what they explained to them and what they could understand and what was revealed to them, however it was revealed to them, think about that. Somebody snapped their fingers and the universe came into existence. Well, the Big Bang Theory kind of says the same thing, just not with a person. So what is that? That's what I'm searching for. What was there before the Big Bang? What caused the Big Bang? Right. So I know we're getting back into Newtonian a little bit and everything else, but just that thought around that of what was there before that.
Hey, Jason.
Yeah.
Good to see you again. It's been a while, but
I know.
but I've thought about that a lot. And, I was thinking of, when you were talking, I was thinking of, I don't know if you know who Bob Lazar is.
No.
He's in the alien realm. He was interviewed by Joe Rogan. Gave a real good.
I'll have to look that up. Yeah.
Yeah, very good. I highly recommend it. But he was talking about, at Area 52 or whatever they called it, where he was working, supposedly
S4
at one time, and they had these UFOs that were found. And he said, I'm going to equate this to if you were to take a fully gassed up Harley Davidson motorcycle and go back 2,000 years ago and drop it in a village.
Yeah.
They would eventually figure out how to turn the key and start it and drive around, but they would have no idea how to build something like that or even refuel it.
Right.
And, and that's kind of what you're saying on that with the Big Bang Theory, that when you're talking to a group of people who may not be as scientific as we are today or as knowledgeable, though Karak might disagree because maybe at some point they were, but that was lost. It's a hard thing. And, the story of creation, let there be light, and there was light. I mean, to me, that's the equivalent of the Big Bang. There's this speck, and then all of a sudden, boom. And now we've got physical matter coming in and the entire universe forms.
Right. So, I know. That's where my thoughts are like, what was there before that? How? And so I know it's hard to wrap anybody's mind around that. Yeah, there was light. Was it just pure energy? Right?
Light and sound. And from sound came light, and from light came sound. And actually, at the level of your DNA, there's light and sound. It's called biophonons and biophotons.
Right. And yeah,
listen, in the grander scheme of things, when you're talking about older, more ancient civilizations, your Hindus, your Vedas, that kind of thing, they said that there was a great outbreath, which is what we know as the Big Bang. And then at some point, there's going to be a great in-breath. And then there's going to be a great out-breath. And then I'll leave it there.
So and now that just feeds right into my loop quantum gravity study. If you want to get real deep into all that stuff. So I'm not a string theory guy. I'm a loop quantum gravity guy. So it's,
Nice.
Karak, I got a question for you. What do you think is more important for mankind as a whole? The biblical story of Christ or the Christ story?
The Christ story.
Okay.
Yeah, I would agree.
Because it's universal.
Yeah.
And it's love. And I think what Dr. Dreiber pointed to is that love is infinite. And I think that the ancients knew that.
A simple thing that, you were talking about, this goes back to the presentation where, the energy that we emit will affect someone else near us, right? You're the average of the other
Not
five
just
people you spend time with, right?
not just, and we
But
didn't
the
get
world,
into
the
it.
universe, everything. No, I know. But what I was saying is because, if you're in a bad mood and you walk into a room and other people are going to feel that, right?
Yeah.
Pretty obviously. But I find that no matter what mood anybody's in, if I just smile and say hello, even if I don't know them, if I'm just walking, hi, it's like people do that to me. It's like all of a sudden doesn't take everything away, but it's like I can just take a breath. And I think that's what you're saying. I mean, it's that where the love, if you can, we talk about, brotherly love. It's not, as Masons, we kind of understand what's going on there. It's the, the love we have for just people, for the world, for the universe, for everything. So,
I would go even a step further. I would say that there is a love that exists that keeps your body in a state of orbit, that there is a love that exists that literally forms the atoms of your body so that you have a physical form, and that if at any point in time that whirling atom stopped, you would no longer exist.
Interesting. So
that there's a centering consciousness that is love, that is, one of my mentors in India said, God is a verb. And it took me a long time to understand what that meant.
Well, but God
he was
is
also
love,
a Kabbalist.
Right.
God
Yeah.
is action. God is a verb.
Mm-hmm.
So God is the outpouring, right? God in another, I love Sufi mystics, Rumi talks about the idea of God, of a mystic, like find the laziest man in the room where everyone is doing everything for him. And that's the mystic, because he understands that God is doing the work and he can just sit back and trust. I tell my wife that sometimes. It doesn't always work out. She gets a little upset.
It goes back to efficiency, right? It's like, efficiency is the lazy man's sport.
Well,
So,
but you got to think, right? Every day you leave your body when you go to sleep or whatever, you come back to your body, your organism has healed. You're refreshed, you're rejuvenated. Something is doing that. Something is causing your cells to spin. Something is the automation is happening, but the automation itself, that gravitational force itself, is beyond, the idea of brotherly love, etc. I would submit that the very idea of being or existence is love, and I think that's what Jesus taught. And the thing is that as Steve and I have talked about this, right, and I've been to India and they have the records. There's a Saint Isa, right? Those 17 lost years. There's documentation of those lost years. So I mean, we can get into it further. I think the story of Christ. I mean, literally, Christ means light. Christos is light bearer. So the story of Christ is someone that has infused the light, that is connected with the universe, that is literally the embodiment of love, and is walking through the planet, basically changing everyone they come in contact with through field theory or whatever you want to call it, through that love emotion. And I think that's something I didn't really touch on too much, but it's not really about thought. Thought is secondary. It's about feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and then because I know the thought and feeling, and I know this is where I get into trouble, because my brain is much more rational, and I tend to what I say is, it's not that I don't have any feelings, and it's that I simply don't let the feelings overwhelm me. What I say is that, my feelings and my emotions become the fuel that drive the engine of reason, right, and rationality, right. Hey, I don't like what's going on here, and that makes me want to change it, but I can't just do a knee-jerk reaction to fix something, right? I then take that energy and focus it into analyze the problem, talk through things like this. What are we really looking at? How do I approach it? What's the best angle to come at it? And then what I think is the best solution. But that energy, you're right, the emotions and the feelings provide me with the energy I need to get the engine running.
Yeah,
right?
well, Jason, that's what I would say would be subduing your passions and acting
absolutely
on the square.
Absolutely.
I mean,
No, absolutely. Well, and then because the Stoics, I mean, that's just, everybody thinks that Stoics or a Stoic person is very unfeeling. Absolutely not.
Mm-mm.
They just simply have them under control
Yeah.
and realize that there's not a lot they can do about them sometimes. So you got to let them wash over you. right? So
I think that's key, right? Like the idea of feeling, when I say feeling, when we want to change something, we need to feel a new feeling to change it. So not the feelings of like, you've hurt my feelings, but because that's its own thing. That's a rising of emotion, right? And energy and motion. It's an arising of emotion. But feeling is different. Feeling is like, I'm choosing to love. Like it's a choice of love, and then the outpicturing or the outpouring of that choice. That's what I mean by feeling.
Right. That's good. I like that.
To just, yeah. So. I don't know if we are like literally 3 people, or if we still have people in. What's up, Steve?
There's 5 people here. Okay.
We got 5 people. Hey, Karak. So I'm really going to pick your mind here, a little bit off topic, but since it was brought up during the presentation tonight, the antediluvian civilization. What are your thoughts on who they are, where they lived on Earth, and where they came from?
So I think that there was an advanced civilization. I think that they had understood that physical matter is vibration. I think that we're heading towards that same direction with a twist. I don't know that I think that they understood their inner technology. The thing that I probably didn't, because I was so excited to just present, the thing that I didn't probably make enough of an effort to pinpoint is that this is all technology. You know, your field is a technology. You know, when we use a cell phone, that's a technology. So telepathy, those kind of things, that's a technology. And I think that those people were not only aware of those levels of ability, what we would consider, right? Like Isaac Asimov says, if you take a civilization and they look at science, it would appear as magic. They would be one and the same. And of course, I'm paraphrasing, but that's essentially the spirit of it. I butchered it, but I apologize if anyone's a huge Asimov fan. They would be indistinguishable. And I think I had a feeling. Nice. I think that they were so aware. The thing about pyramids is it's sacred geometry. And I didn't get into, I could give a whole talk on that alone, but sacred geometry talks about the 5 platonic solids. I told Warren, I'm like, the next talk I'm giving is on alchemy. That's all I know. Gonna blow people away with some of the stuff I want to talk about on alchemy.
Well, and I know there's a resonant. I mean, there's an ancient geometry or a page on Facebook that I follow. The sacred geometry. That's what it is. So, and they have some very interesting things that they post from time to time. So, if you don't follow that,
the 5 platonic solids are found all around the world, and we have now scientifically proven that the correlation between those particular shapes, interestingly enough, they're called cosmic volumes, which volume can also mean book. So I'll leave that. But like at the end of the day, there was a place in Egypt where you would go and sit with these geometries, and people would go to be healed by these sacred geometries because they were cosmic forms, and they were like fingerprints of God. Essentially, it was the hand of God, the 5 different geometries of God, and so they would help heal the body through wholeness. I think that we've lost our sense of interconnection and wholeness. And what's crazy is that the more we get scientific and like look at the world at a microscopic or even a macrocosmic level, we realize at a quantum level, there's no difference between me, this desk, you, this computer. Like it's just a giant soup of different frequencies and energies. I think that the antediluvian civilization knew that inherently. And I think that there's a solar consciousness that also they were very aware of. And I think that there are remnants of it in our fraternity. And I'll leave that alone.
So yeah, I'll say, Karak, that, I had a thought one night. I was, sitting, watching a movie, reading a book, and surfing the internet all at the same time as I do.
Always fun. Multitasking,
I
like
do quite
to say.
often. And so I came upon this story, and it was talking about how a planet or a moon or something hit the Earth, and that was responsible for our life. for us being here, that brought life to, an otherwise just rocky, dead planet. And so I started thinking about, and I called Warren immediately. And of course, he thought I was a little bit crazy, but yeah, I probably am. So that's all good. But it was the aspect of what if, we know how impregnation works with humans and animals on this planet, but what if there is a similar concept at a planetary level?
And so in the Vedas, they talk about the fact that the planet itself is its own consciousness separate from the human. Right. And basically the planets actually have frequencies. There's separate frequencies that are being emitted and pulsing. So you could say on a level where we're measuring scientifically, that pulse is that particular planet's heartbeat.
Well, what I'm saying is, so what if with these frequencies and the communication between these living beings of planets that is much higher than what we can comprehend?
100%.
We're talking.
That's what the ancients said.
In ancient and very long lifespan thing. What if, there was the courtship between two planets, and then this planet set a moon to a male planet, Mars maybe, sent a moon to impregnate Earth, Gaia, the mother. And so therefore life was formed here because of the communication between two planets. It was just a weird idea.
Not only do I think that that's
really outside of the box, and
that's literally what the Vedas say. They say that the planets impregnate other planets, and I mean, like that basically that the sun is a seed, and that it grows planets, and that these planets, when they become sentient and aware of each other, then all of a sudden the sun starts to spread into the greater garden of the galaxy. So the whole idea of off worlds, right? Like we think, oh, we're going to go to Mars and colonize, and there's a lot of different theories around, ancient aliens. And like I saw the Sukalos image from Chef, which is hilarious. But
no, we're not going to get into chariots. We're not going to get into chariots of the gods here. Okay.
I don't need to get into chariots of the gods.
No. We'll leave that alone. It's okay.
I think that it is, first of all, our forefathers, who were mostly Masons, were deists. Secondly, a lot of them believed in off-world. They believed they weren't Christian; they were deists. Secondly, a lot of them believed in off-world beings. That basically the universe was vast, and so therefore, of course, there was life and sentience on other planets. I think we are coming out of the jungle of our own consciousness to think that we are alone. Now, with that said, I believe that eventually when we colonize Mars and we start that whole process, that we'll start understanding that how interconnected we are. I read something in the 50s, they talked about all these UFOs coming from Venus, right? And being part Native American, we talk about the Sky Brothers and all that kind of stuff in our ceremony and from Venus. Well, interestingly enough, when I was talking to my science teacher back in the day, he would be like, oh, well, that planet is so inhospitable. There's no way there's life, etc. That was just all like a big whatever. Well, recently, like in the last year, we've realized that there could actually be a civilization on Venus that is living in the sky because it has the same atmosphere as Earth, and that the actual physical ground is, inhospitable, but the actual atmosphere is not. And that's actually what they said in the 50s, that they were in sky cities, and they came. So you can look at, we're going off topic, but again, back to the Nazi Germany side of things, the whole Nazi party started because Hitler wanted to prove that the Aryan race came from an antediluvian society. So they believed in Atlantis and started that whole process. So I just think that we're kind of coming full circle, Steve, when it comes to our knowledge of things. I think that man is so, when you don't think in those terms, when you don't think that planets can be alive and that, it's just alive as us with its own consciousness and its own thought bubble and interact with other planets, I think that you're really egotistical.
Yeah,
honestly.
Well, I agree. I had an argument. My father-in-law is a very conservation-minded person and very eco-friendly. And I had a conversation with him years ago, and he's like, we're going to destroy the planet. And I said, I think the planet has a much greater prospect of destroying us before we ever get close to destroying it.
Yeah, what was it the comedian said? So why don't you ask those people in Pompeii if they feel like a threat to the planet this week?
Yeah,
yeah.
Well, George Carlin had stated.
Oh yeah, he went off on him. Yeah,
that about it. He said, that Earth wanted plastic, didn't know how to make it, so it knew how to make man, made made plastic. When it gets enough, it gets rid of.
And now
that is the theory of the technosphere.
It's the Earth plus plastic.
That is the theory.
That's it,
that is actually the theory of the technosphere, is that we're creating these poisons to create the cure. And that essentially at some point in time, we're going to understand that we're out of balance. And then a new society emerges that is in even greater balance than the previous society. And that's really, I think, where we're headed, to be quite honest.
So I know that there's some Native American mythos that I think it's with, what is the tribe? Where they've talked that we've had like 3 or 4 civilizations that have come and been destroyed and rebuilt.
Well, actually, that's what the Maya say, is that there are 26,000-year cycles, and every 13,000-year cycles, the Earth shifts, and they actually say shift. And according to what we've seen in geological records, the magnetic fields actually do shift every about 13,000 years.
Yeah, it flips,
the Maya
right?
say that we've gone through.
Reverses,
right.
Yeah,
and we're on the verge of that right now. That's kind of in process now. It's just not a fast process.
Well, and the other part of that is to think about from just another IT guy. I mean, the last time it happened, we didn't have electrical devices.
Right.
I mean, anything that's running electric current in any way and has polarity, you're in trouble. Everything's going to just go haywire. Yeah. So
I would argue that we didn't have our current version of electrical devices. I
Correct,
often wonder if there wasn't crystal tubes and things like that.
Right, but we didn't depend on the flipping a switch and the lights coming on, air refrigeration and things like that. That's what I'm saying. All that stuff will be thrown into.
Well, it'll be fried
into chaos.
The only thing that would, if another geological shift happens where the poles reverse, hopefully not in my lifetime, the only thing that would work would be tube technology. Everything else would be gone.
So we got to go back to the 40s and 50s. Is that it? 60s.
I think that Tesla was suppressed because he would have created a technology that would have been universal no matter what planet you were on.
Yeah. I wish I could see those. I know they're all conspiracy theories, but man, he had some out there ideas that he proved. And
I don't think that they're conspiracy theories. I don't think they're conspiracy theories at all. He used the heartbeat of the planet. He used the Schumann resonance to create such an intense bolt of lightning in Colorado Springs that he literally destroyed an entire town's electrical grid.
Oh yeah,
because he basically, So I don't think there are conspiracy theories. I think he was so connected to, first of all, alternating current is a heartbeat.
Oh yeah,
and so I think he was so connected to. It's a heartbeat.
Yeah. It's a sine wave, if you think about it. It's just up and down.
It's a pulse.
Up and down. Right, exactly.
So I think that he was so connected to the sacred geometric universe, literally, that I think that his technology that he was making was in harmony with all of that. If Wardenclyffe, if Wardenclyffe would have been finished, and JP Morgan, and as soon as he was like, no meter, it's done. But if Wardenclyffe would have been finished, he would have literally created the same thing that was happening in ancient Egypt. It's almost the identical technology. It's an aquifer underneath of, Jones Beach, and a huge transduction of current that was using the Earth's electromagnetic field.
Right, and he talked about sending electricity through the Earth to supply everybody. Right. So.
Right. Because what you're doing is you're accelerating that electricity. You're stepping it up. We've proven wireless electricity now. I watched a TED Talk on it. They're like, we now understand wireless electricity. We'll have wireless, tuned circuits. All the stuff Tesla was talking about, we've now proven, which is fascinating. If you want a TED Talk on it, I'll have to find it and send it to you. It's a really, really good TED Talk. But he all he was saying is, step up the electricity take it, like basically use the aura of the earth, use the ionosphere, move it where you want, and then step it back down. And so, you know, that like, and he wasn't a proponent of just Tesla coil technology or whatever. He was also a proponent of, you know, hydroelectric, but he was a proponent of all these different forms of electricity that you could then put into the atmosphere and send somewhere else. You know, and I think that we are, first of all, every technology we're using right now is explosive. You know, the Nazi technology that was being used by Schauberger and those guys, it's implosive, and it's a technology that's how tornadoes form, that's whirlpools. So that implosive technology is kind of the next step, I think.